Hi everyone, it's Nadine. Today we are one-on-one with Doris Reimer. Doris is a lawyer in Calgary, and we met at one of the freedom rallies in front of City Hall. And I'm going to let her introduce herself here. But don't forget, if you like the video, hit subscribe. Make sure you hit that little bell, the notification, so that you get notice each and every time we publish a new video. So, Doris.
Thanks for having me, Nadine.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Why don't you just introduce yourself quickly?
Well, I am a lawyer in Calgary. I've been here for 20 years, originally from Saskatchewan, so I went to the UNivS. And right now I practice mostly business law, wills and estates. However, when everything started happening early in 2020, I had to take a bit of a deep dive into constitutional law and human rights law and kind of brush up on that and find out what our rights really are.
Fantastic. So what our rights really are, because there's some people who seem to think we don't have any.
That's right.
So you went to the University of Saskatchewan?
That's correct.
And so you graduated with your law degree in what year?
In 1999.
1999. So you've been doing this a little while?
I have.
Wonderful. And so business law is a lot about contracts and wills and estates. And of course, this last year in particular, you said you kind of dove back into human rights and the charter.
Well, certainly learning about it. I've been following Rocco Galati, who's sort of the lead constitutional lawyer in Canada. And so I follow him. He certainly gives a lot of great insight into what our constitutional rights are and what our rights are in terms of all of these restrictions and mandates that have been coming down. So I just try to keep on top of that.
Fantastic. So we met down at the Freedom March on Saturday last week. And my battery died, so I was going to do this interview that day. And I got even a better deal. I got you to come here instead. And so why would you, as a lawyer, take such a risk to attend, what the media has coined as, illegal, and worse, we're just anti-maskers. Why would you take that risk to attend something like that?
Well, I've been watching this unfold ever since March, and nobody is coming out. None of our leaders, our government leaders, the big corporations, nobody's coming out and letting people know the other side. In Canada, we've really had a lot of freedom. We haven't really had to worry about the violation of human rights that's occurring now. So this is kind of just come upon us by surprise, right? And nobody's really prepared for it.
Uncharted territory.
Yeah. So when I had the opportunity to speak at the rally, I just feel like at this point we have nothing to lose. We really need to stand up and oppose these laws, and they're gross violations of our rights, and we just really need to protect them. So
that's a pretty strong statement, a gross violation of our rights.
Well, I mean, you look at the restrictions, right now in Calgary, or I believe it's Alberta, there's nobody allowed in your homes. I was really disturbed by, seeing posts of people visiting their loved ones in the hospital through the window. And I'm like, how is this okay? How are people just accepting this? The masking bylaws. And that's what I chose to speak out about at the rally, because that's the one that's really in your face, and there's really a lot of symbolism to it, and it's a really offensive and
yet so many people say, oh, it's such a minor thing.
Right,
and
just a mask.
if it's just a mask, and if I help one person, I'm doing good. I find it such virtue signaling. Personally,
Absolutely.
It's like, okay, if it makes you feel better, and again, if people choose to wear masks, wear a mask.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's all about choice.
It's all about choice.
Absolutely. If that makes you feel better. But if you don't want to wear a mask, and again, it's a face covering, right? So it covers your breathing apparatus, right? And it hides your emotions and your expression and all those things that give us life. And so when that came out, I was just like, whoa, like that's just, getting too close to my bodily autonomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just found it so offensive, and it continues to really bother me.
Yeah, for me, it was my daughter.
And the children, masking
Right.
children is just, it's so disturbing.
And we've openly admitted time and time again that this virus, COVID-19, has virtually zero impact on children. And yet we're asking them to wear masks. That's never made any sense to me, and it's never been okay.
No, and it's not okay. These children are in their formative years. Imagine the long-term psychological effects on the children, and even the psychological effects on adults. I mean, as we lose our humanity, and you see it already when I go into the grocery store without a mask. It's not uncommon for me to be confronted by someone who wants me to wear a mask. And it's very,
Well, it's really funny because in March, though, it was the opposite. There were some people who wore masks in March, and everybody was like, look at that person, they're wearing a mask, little, extreme, don't you think? And now it's the exact opposite. Those who are not wearing a mask, we're the ones that are being singled out. And it's like, I purposely try not to go, where I don't need to go. But you have to eat. You got to go get groceries. You have to, and I've actually been pretty good. But I have had people come to me and go, but it would be better if you had a mask. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I'm unable to wear a mask. And then people immediately think, if you have a medical reason, and it's like I don't have to give you a reason as to why I'm unable to wear a mask. If I'm exempt, I'm exempt.
right.
You have a visitor there.
Oh,
Hey,
hello there.
JJ. Yeah, he's a sucky, this one too. So you did in your presentation, give us just a high-level summary of the presentation that you gave on Saturday.
Well, I talked a lot about the city's mask bylaw, which came in August, and that in itself was, raised the question, well, if masks really work, why didn't they implement them in March, right? Like, waiting months and months to implement something that supposedly, stops the spread of this virus. It raises that question. And a lot of this is really, sometimes you find the answers by asking a lot of questions, right?
And the left hates that.
That's right.
You're not allowed to ask questions because, for the most part, I find they don't actually have the answers to them.
Right.
So they hate it when you actually ask, especially an intelligent question,
Right.
successful lawyer, educated, you're definitely,
Thank you. But what I wanted to bring out about the Calgary's mask bylaw is how they have in the small print the exemptions, which are a reflection of our Human Rights Act and our primordial and inalienable human rights. But they're in small print, and so they haven't educated the public on what the mask bylaw really is. And I really felt it was important to get that out there. Right now we have, all the businesses have the mask bylaw posted on their front door, and it's a picture of, 3 individuals wearing a mask, so it's not clear. Everybody thinks a mask mandate means everybody has to wear a mask, and that is simply not the case. There's exemptions for physical disabilities and mental disabilities, right? And those, they're invisible, a lot of them, right? So for those of us who have exemptions, we don't have a need to explain ourselves, but yet we're always confronted and a lot of times accosted in a very humiliating way. And I just felt like it was time that people understood that this is not a mandate. It's there's exceptions, and people need to understand what those are.
So give me an example of some of the exemptions that you can use.
Well, there's a whole list. Children under 2 are exempt. If you're not able to put a mask on by yourself or take it off by yourself, you're exempt. But like I said, the more common ones are the disability. And a lot of times you can't see what somebody's disability is. It could be PTSD. It could be anxiety wearing a mask, claustrophobia, asthma. There's so many various conditions that people have, and they cannot wear a mask.
Because so many people seem to think that if there's nothing physically wrong with you, then wear a mask.
Exactly.
Right.
Or oh, you're going into a grocery store for 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal. And like I said, the laws provide exemptions for it, and you don't need to explain yourself.
And I think that's the key part is that, so what happens when I go into the grocery store and somebody says, sorry, you're not welcome here? What do you mean I'm not welcome? No, I'm sorry, without a mask, you can't come in. What do you recommend for people to do?
To declare their exemption. So under the city bylaw, all you need to do is say, I'm exempt. And if you look at their website, they even say, they're not expecting businesses to enforce the bylaw because not everybody can wear a face covering. So just declare your exemption. And in my experience, they have just let you in. Now, I know there's the big box stores that are starting to get a little more militant about this. Costco has a blanket. We're not letting you in if you're not wearing a mask. And I mean, that's a clear violation of our human rights.
Now, some people will say, though, because Costco is interesting because it's a membership, right? It's not just a public store. It's actually for its members.
It's a membership, but the memberships are offered to the public. So if you have a business license and you're offering goods or services to the public, whether it's through a membership or not, you're obligated under the Human Rights Act to comply with
the regulations and the rules.
Yeah, exactly. And just to be clear, the Human Rights Act, it specifically prohibits businesses from denying you entry if you have
a disability,
right?
Or you have
the discrimination, right?
Yeah.
It prevents you from denying entry on discriminatory grounds, and those discriminatory grounds include physical, mental disabilities, and religion.
Interesting. So including religion.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So because you focused a lot on the mask bylaw, and one of the things that I love right now is the media. The media has, and I spoke to this last night in a video that we did, has taken everything and they twist it. And I find it's not out and out a lie. They just tell a lot of half-truths to me, which is very dishonest. News is supposed to be news. It's supposed to be fact-based. It's supposed to be verified. It's supposed to be based upon real data, science. And, things like masks, things like, even COVID and some of the, I find, very draconian measures that policy and government have been forcing upon people are a direct violation of our rights. And, so why personally would you, why is this important for you to stand up?
Well, as I stated earlier, somebody has to do it. Our leaders aren't doing it. And there seems to be a real hunger, I think, amongst people. I'm seeing more and more people. They're coming out to the rallies. The response I received after
only
the
300
rally,
people is...
Oh,
that's all.
yeah, exactly.
How many people, just so people know, because they hear me, but how many people were there?
There was, I would say, closer to 1,500. Definitely over 1,000.
Yeah.
And
the media reported 300.
Several hundred. I think some even said a couple hundred.
Yeah.
I think I heard that. So always that twisting. It's like, and when you don't tell the whole truth, you're not telling the truth.
I love that. So why don't you elaborate on that a little bit? Because to me, they'll go, oh, we're not telling the truth. But, with the media, I've seen them take, 2 events, merge them into one, and take snippets of one to validate another. But they're completely separate events. And they have a complete separate set of circumstances around each. And they seem to pick and choose, like this cherry pick what I want that fits my narrative.
Yes.
As opposed to this is the facts that were presented on that day. If there's 1,500 people, you can't say, well, there was 300. Well, there was only 300 there when we were there 20 minutes before the rally began. Okay, fair enough. It's not necessarily a lie, but it's not the truth either. So tell me, let's talk a little bit about the law, because the law is very specific. The words you choose, the circumstances, you're not allowed to, cherry pick this and plug it in here. Tell me a little bit about how the law works. How is it that, Mayor Nenshi can turn around and even propose a mask bylaw?
Well, like I said, the bylaw itself is not a violation of the law, but it's the way it's presented because they're not educating people on what the bylaw really says. As I said, they talk about it being a mandate. Well, the exemptions are very, very important. They're critical. So when you downplay the crux of the bylaw, you're not being truthful about it. And going to your other question about, how can he implement these laws? What's happening is, if you've ever been through the court system, you're going to know it takes a long time to get from start to finish, right? So you file, if you're going to file an action, you file it. The other side has time to respond. There's a lot of document production, time goes by. It takes a long time to get a court date and that kind of thing. So on any, challenge to these bylaws and these laws that are coming down, it's going to take a long time before they get to the courts and they get resolved, especially the charter challenges, because you are going to have to get in expert witnesses. You're going to do a very thorough job. So, with the charter challenges, I think it's very obvious, like even the government data doesn't support that this is a pandemic or a health crisis. Just look at the data. I think I saw in the news a couple of weeks ago, there's 166 COVID deaths in Canada that were not in long-term care. Well, what does that tell you? We're into month 9 of this supposed crisis.
166 people out of 34, 36, yeah. 37 million people.
Exactly.
It doesn't even move the needle.
Exactly. So, but having said that, when you do, as a lawyer, when you're going through the charter challenge, you are going to get in the experts, talking about the PCR tests and how reliable or unreliable they are. There's so many aspects to it. So it's not something like that you can just get into the court just that quickly. Although, there are certain things like a judicial review or an injunction application that could be brought at least to, and I believe that those are in the works, but I haven't seen anything come out quite yet.
So,
go ahead. Sorry. Oh, and I was just going to say, though, in the meantime, while you're waiting for things to get resolved in the court, the governments are pushing their agendas through, right? So regardless of what might or might not occur at the end of that road, they're pushing things right now, right? And they're able to sort of.
Yeah, and it is, I think for me, it boils down to there is so much data and science on the other side of this coin that has not been presented. The media doesn't speak of it. So, for example, like John Carpay with the Justice Center just released a news release. Government data shows lockdowns more deadly than COVID-19. And the things that he brings up are the stats, the actual deaths, like you said, 166 at the time that you were familiar with, out of 37 million people. It's not even a percent. And then there are vulnerable people, and people, now you're denying it exists. It's like, let's not be foolish. We're not denying that COVID-19 is not real, but where did the flu go this year?
Exactly.
And it's funny, when I look through some of the data that they've presented, the numbers for cancer are down, respiratory illnesses are down, heart disease is down, all these things are down. And then when you look at the total number of deaths for the month of September, for example, we're below the statistical average, including COVID. So where is the pandemic?
Exactly.
Where's the pandemic? We're just asking for the data. We're just asking for the truth, right? And I think that's what real journalism should be, which I don't claim to be, because this is very opinionated. This is coming from my side of the story. Everybody knows that. But it's the other side of the story that nobody wants to stand up and say, hold on here a minute, back up. Let's hear the third side, the flip side of that coin. So, and it goes on and on and on. There's so many, the deaths, like who's going to accept responsibility for the deaths that have occurred because people couldn't get breast cancer surgery? The one gentleman who died waiting for surgery and had a heart attack. He left behind 2 little children.
Exactly.
Like, who's accepting responsibility for this? That's what I want to know. And people say, well, no one's talking about that. That's criminal.
That's criminal. I agree.
Right? So I want to talk to you. I'd mentioned earlier about the Minister of Justice, Casey Madhu, came out, and this week he actually made a statement, and I thought it was actually very good. I'm not a liberal fan by no means, and but you give credit where credit is due. And one of his comments was the need to balance enforcement with the need to respect our charter rights. And his other comment was, you do not suspend our charter rights even in a pandemic. So arguably, whether or not we're in a pandemic, that's a different story. I don't think we are, but if we are, fair enough.
Our charter rights don't disappear. Whether or not we're in a pandemic, our charter rights do not disappear. There are limits. There are limits to our freedoms, right? But they have to be proven. And again, going back to the data does not support that the infringements on our charter rights are valid.
Yeah, and he actually said that. I mean, he even came out and said, you cannot suspend our charter rights even in a pandemic. And we're questionable whether we're in a pandemic or not, but it doesn't mean they go away. Right? Right. It's not at the convenience or the whim of a government or whoever happens to make a statement. I don't care if you're the prime minister. They're there for our protection against somebody who might choose to take advantage of a situation or a circumstance.
Absolutely. Our human rights and our charter rights, our rights to life, liberty, security of the person are paramount.
In a free society.
In a free and democratic society. And no circumstance erases those rights,
Fantastic.
In my opinion.
So I want to talk about Rachel Notley, because she challenged the Minister of Justice, and this was her quote: "He is delivering exactly the wrong message. To be clear," she states, "I think he is wrong. The laws are not unconstitutional. It is an idiotic statement." So here is, she was the premier of this province, very high standing individual. And, she happens to think that what's going on is not unconstitutional, which for me, I find extremely bothersome and extremely scary.
I agree.
Right? Is that not a scary statement? And then she says it's an idiotic statement. And then she goes on to say, the problem is he is the Attorney General.
I have no words.
Isn't that hilarious?
It's unbelievable.
Right, because I sit back and I go, so I would assume that if he's the Attorney General, that he probably has some expertise or access to experts who are probably giving him some information about the Charter of Rights. And, the fact that she's not even questioning the measures that are being taken. And to me, it goes to show just how this entire situation has been, they're using this to their advantage. It's all political.
It's very disturbing.
Yeah. They've taken what has, they're really preying, these are predators. They're really preying on people's fears.
Absolutely.
They're not giving information that's balanced on both sides, which in any court of law, you have to present both sides. You would think the media would be doing this, but they're not. So what would you say to Miss Notley if you had an opportunity? This is not constitutional, idiotic statement.
She just has no credibility. To make a statement like that is just, I have no words.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to say, isn't it? Because, like I said, these politicians who are just playing politics and happy to dose out all kinds of draconian measures that have all kinds of unforeseen consequences.
Exactly. And the Charter is there to protect us from draconian government measures. So to say that it doesn't exist and that they can just do whatever they want, I'm sorry, but these government officials, they don't care whether I live or die. And what they're doing is so intrusive and so invasive. This is not the time to follow the government orders.
All right, I did that intentionally to poke the snake here, to kind of rally up a little bit. So what should people be doing right now?
Well, they should, I call it civil disobedience. They should not be complying with these orders. And they need to come out. This is not the time to be shy. This is not the time to obey. It's time to come out and stand up for your human rights. And I think the masking, again, is probably the one that's in our face the most. So all the measures are very invasive and intrusive and create a lot of disruption in our lives and disruption in our families and our relationships and our community. They're all very bothersome, but I find the mask one is probably the easiest one to advocate for yourself, because you're going out into a business or you're going out to just buy groceries, which is a very usual activity. And so to be able to stand up for yourself on the mask issue, especially, since you and I know that that's the precursor to the mandatory vaccine. So if you're going to consent to them ordering that you wear a mask or mandating that you wear a mask, imagine what's coming down the pipes, right? And, once you lose your bodily autonomy, it's over. I'm sorry to say, this is the time to stand up.
Yeah, because property really starts right here with the person, right? When we talk about property rights, which in Canada, I know there's a lot of laws, we don't actually have property rights, but it starts right here first, and they can't tell you what you can and cannot do with your physical person.
Exactly.
And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand, which is why it's so important to take the time to look at the data, to take a look at the research, because there is a tremendous amount of research out there that show how masks can actually be very harmful.
Exactly.
And especially for children. And there is a ton of data out there on how masks cannot prevent the spread of this virus.
And exactly, like you said, they are harmful. You can look at, I believe it was CTV that put out something from the Canadian Dental Association where they talk about mask mouth, which is bacteria forming in your mouth from wearing a mask for prolonged periods of time, I'm sure. But if that's what's happening, in your mouth, imagine, and I'm not a doctor, but, use your common sense, right? What's going to happen to your lungs from prolonged mask use?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so with...
and who's going to take responsibility for that? The government?
Yeah.
And, as employers, I think employers need to understand that if they're making their employees wear masks for these long periods of time and they become ill because of that, it's the employer that's liable. It's not going to be the government. I spoke to a small business owner just recently, and I asked him, well, who do you think is going to be liable if one of your employees gets sick from wearing a mask? And he said, well, the government, because they're the ones that are telling me to do it. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's not how it's going to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of that stuff is a bit of an eye opener to some of these small businesses. And
now, you just told me a little story. You had a little bit of a run-in with the law at Chinook Mall. Dum, 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 you rebel, you. Because you stood up for your rights and you were being refused entry to purchase something at a store. The store had taken a very firm stance and said, sorry, you can't shop here, when you were actually allowed to go in. Then it was, you can't pay for the item that you wanted, and they called the police. The police, what was your experience with the police? Because I had, some experiences last weekend with the police officers, and they're very frustrated. And, I know there's some bad apples, but there's bad lawyers, right? There's bad doctors. There's bad in everything,
yeah.
Right? But I think as a general rule, we've got some pretty good, pretty understanding, common sense police officers.
We do. The police that I've encountered have been phenomenal. And they have the same concerns that a lot of us do with all these mandates. And they don't want to be out there enforcing it. They don't want to be, coming to houses because the neighbor is snitching on, somebody's over at the neighbor's house kind of thing. They don't want to be doing that. This isn't a pleasant time for them.
Yeah, and I just want to bring that up because it is not a pleasant time for them. And, people are very quick to get right in the police officer's face. And one of the things I've been telling people is like, look, if somebody does approach you, you don't have to be disrespectful. Stand your ground.
Right.
Stand your ground. You know your rights.
Right.
You're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
Because we're not doing anything wrong.
We're not doing anything wrong. And people need to understand that. And they need to be confident in that. And that starts with understanding what their rights are. And as people get more and more better at understanding what their rights are, I think they're going to be able to advocate for themselves better.
Absolutely. And that's the whole purpose of today is, you're not doing anything wrong and you're not alone. There are other people who have taken this stance and we're not protesting masks, and we're not protesting, we're standing up, I think, for freedom.
That's correct, right.
I mean, we just had Remembrance Day, and, I find it absolutely almost heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. It's heart-wrenching to think that we had men and women who were willing to stare death in the face, on the other side of a barrel of a gun so that we could have freedom, only to have politicians play these types of games with our lives. Thousands of businesses have closed. Far more, I think, businesses have closed than deaths have occurred.
Right. And that in itself, the COVID measures are more destructive than COVID itself.
Mm-hmm. And so because you practice business law.
Yes.
So the business owners, because they feel like they have no choice. If I want to stay open,
that's how
I have to follow the law.
Well, they've got Alberta Health employees in their businesses telling them, monitoring their sanitary procedures, constantly, right? And they're being told, like, you got to do this, you got to do that, blah, 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 blah. And they're intimidated by it, absolutely. And they're just like, okay, you know what? We've already been through one lockdown. I'm just lucky to be open, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of the law, as you said. It's very intimidating for them. And I'd really like to see sort of businesses getting together and setting it up. And I think we're going to start to see that a little bit more as people are becoming more aware and more concerned and, are able to see how destructive this is on our economy and our society. And it's really just destroying the middle class, right? And that's really scary. So I'm just really hoping that, business owners are going to be able to start opening their eyes and starting to take a stand and saying, I'm not closing and I'm not, complying with orders that are nonsensical, that are contradictory, and, and hopefully they'll be able to stand up to these individuals that are sent in, to their businesses by the government.
We have COVID enforcement. Did you know that? People who have been employed, apparently by the government, to go around to these businesses and check whether or not they're complying with the rules and writing fines.
And they have no jurisdiction.
Well, thank you for coming today and speaking with me because, it's one thing for me to say things, and I've done lots and seen lots in my life, but I'm not a lawyer. I have studied some law. My sister has a law degree. I've worked with lawyers through the aerospace and defense. I've worked with lawyers on the finance side. I have many friends who are lawyers. But for me, we need more doctors. We need more lawyers to stand up because you are going to give everybody else courage. Because you understand the law, you know your rights. And if you're willing to do it, then other people are going to go, well, if she's willing to do it and she understands and knows the law, she's a lawyer, then it's that professionalism, that credibility that lends itself to other people to say, you know what, I can do that too. And I think right now, for me, that's really what I hope people take away is, you know what, you're not in this alone. The law is actually on your side. And don't be afraid to exercise your rights. And that doesn't mean that you have to, again, to be disrespectful. It doesn't mean that you have to be confrontational just for the sake of doing so. But you do have options. So 2 minutes, all yours.
Oh. Now you're putting me on the spot.
I do to everybody. I don't discriminate.
Well, I just hope that people are really going to stand up for their rights, because this is really about how people are going to react to this COVID situation and all the mandates that are coming down. Speaking out at the rally, the best thing that's really happened is that I've had these other lawyers that are like, you know what, we feel the same way, because I've been feeling alone as a lawyer even. It's not like all of the lawyers are thinking that this pandemic isn't, quite what they're presenting it to be. So, it's really encouraging to now have a group of lawyers to work with where we see what's coming, we see the dangers of complying with these laws. And, like I said, it's very preliminary, but I'm just really excited about sort of coming up with maybe an awareness campaign and making people feel confident. And, our freedom is just, it's paramount. And these intrusive and offensive violations to our human rights and our constitutional rights, they're dangerous. And, we just need to stand up, and I'm just hoping that people are going to have the courage, and that more and more people are going to, it starts, I think, with opposing the mask bylaw, because we do not consent. We do not consent to what this represents. We do not consent to what's coming down the pipes. And it needs to start now. If we don't fight back now, it's going to get really hard to try to get these rights back down the road. And that's what I have to say.
Wonderful. Yeah, because, I always tell people, better to have made a wrong decision, best to make the right decision, but better to have made a wrong decision than to have made no decision at all.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, people who seem to think that, I'll just be silent and I'll sit on the sidelines.
Well, freedom dies in silence. I don't know if you've heard that, but that's one of my favorite sayings. Freedom dies in silence.
It does. It does. So if you're silent on this issue, This is how we lose our freedoms, and it's very important for people. And again, you don't have to do it disrespectfully, you don't have to do it rudely, but you are on the right side of the law in exercising your rights, and being able to show that. Like these rallies are not, we're allowed to assemble. We're allowed to question our government. I mean, that is the whole purpose of a free society. So thank you, Doris.
Thank you for having me, Nadine. It's been a pleasure.
Very, very. JJ thanks you. He's loved it. He's got like JJ. 30 minutes of attention there. So he's like, yeah, you're not going, right?
I think JJ's coming with me.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll be bringing him back, because this is how he's like all the time. He's like, pet me.
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone. I hope this helps clarify some of the questions around our charter rights and freedoms. And I hope you do take this to heart and are willing and feel a little more courageous and a little more confident in being able to question authority. Because this is really what it's all about, is questioning the dialogue that's going on. Actually, it's not even a dialogue, it's a monologue. We're being told what to do and expected to comply. And they're not producing the evidence to uphold these types of draconian measures. And we are 9 months into this, and people are saying, well, when a vaccine comes out, I'm going, what about the 50, 60, 70% right now that don't want to be vaccinated? So you're going to make that mandatory? And if we don't, well, then what does that mean? We're going to be locked in our houses, not allowed to have guests, friends, family, grandma over for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Speaking of Christmas, they can't cancel Christmas. So again, if you like this message, please do share and get the message out. Spread it to your friends. You're not alone. We're not alone. We have rights. We just need to exercise them. So click the notification bell. Make sure you subscribe. And thank you for watching. Until the next time. Bye.